All right. Hi, my name is Josh Moore, and I'm a senior at Lone Star High School. As you can see, I'm involved in the independent study and mentorship program. First off, I would like to say thank you to everyone that's here, and thank you specifically to my mentor, youth pastor Lucas Ashley, for everything that he's done and all the help that he's given me. So, ISM, what it is basically, to start, we pick a field of study that we think we may want to have an occupation in later on in life. And throughout the year, basically, you study and research in order to find out if that's truly what you want to do. So to start, I'm gonna start with a quote, and this quote I took from one of my interviews I conducted, and it's from Carrie Bourne. And the quote states, "Don't shy away from anything, from the small things. Nothing is too small. Act before you're asked, and be an eager servant." And I thought this was a really cool quote because for me it truly emphasizes what ministry is, especially full-time ministry. Because what we're called to do is we're called to be servants. In the Bible it says the first shall become last and the last shall become first. Now this is not to say that you should be a servant in order to become first later on in life. You should really have the heart of a servant to want to help people, to want to be there for others. And that's really what ministry is about. For ISM, we were required to construct a mission statement at the beginning of the year. And my mission statement is that my mission is to understand the particulars of pastoral worship and the daily responsibilities in order to be able to truly lead people to encounter Christ. We also had to create a topic proposal, which realistically this is why we chose the field that we did. For myself, there's multiple different reasons, really. I have been involved in church and music my entire life. Ever since I was little, I have been in music. My mom has led worship in churches. My dad has sung as well. And so since I was little, I've been involved in choirs, whether that be church choir, a school choir, a state choir, or even a region choir. It's been really cool. I did not mean to do that. But I've been involved in many different things with music. And then in 5th grade, I received my first guitar, and I began taking lessons. Didn't really take it seriously until about 8th grade year, or freshman year, and that's when I really, like I said, started taking it seriously and got to the point where I could play in front of people. As far as church goes, my dad used to be the pastor of a church, and so I've really been in church since I was born. It's not something that's anything new to me, and I've been in church all my life. As far as serving goes, though, when I was in about 5th grade, I started serving at the Simple Church, which is the church we were attending at the time. And I began helping with the 2- and 3-year-old classroom, which was really cool. I found out that I have a passion to help with kids and whatnot. And so even now at my church today, I do serve in the 2- and 3-year-old classroom where I'm a teacher. And since then, I've also gotten the opportunity to be involved in many other different areas. On Sunday mornings, I have had the opportunity to play in the church band, which has been really cool. And as far as worship goes, it's been a big step in my path down that road. Also, with our Fuse band, I've been able to become a leader for that, and I help lead worship every Wednesday night in doing that. And so it's been a really cool opportunity. And then also we have FCA, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes here at Lone Star. And for that, I've been involved really with FCA since 7th grade, but here at Lone Star, I've been attending since freshman year. Sophomore year, I became a leader, and since then, I like to think I've had a positive impact, and I have helped transform the leadership and the group as a whole into a better version of itself. So in ISM, we're required to do a number of different tasks, and the first of which has to do with doing research. And in this, what we do is we find different articles or different ideas of research for whatever it is, and we have to assess those and pick out what we think is important for our field of study. My first article talked about having some keys to worship, and the big thing that I got out of this were the qualities of a worship pastor. And the number one was having a connectedness to God. And this involves being in the Word daily, reading your Bible, studying, doing devotionals, whatever that may be. Also, it talks about praying and staying in contact and talking to God on a daily basis consistently, which is really important. But then also being involved in your church. You can attend a church on Sunday but still not be connected. The big thing is you want to find a life group, a small group. You want to serve. You want to have community with other people and live life together. And that's how you stay connected to God through that. Also, the other quality of a worship pastor would be to be a leader. You obviously have to be able to lead in the church. You have to be an example for others, but also outside of church. A lot of worship pastors aren't full-time, so maybe say when I get older, I'll have a job outside of a church. I have to example the same leadership qualities that I have in church as well as in the workplace. The next article talked about being primed for ministry. This one was really cool too because it talked about God's plan and how it's going to happen regardless of what we do or say and what we want. The cool part that I learned through this was that he puts us into situations that we can handle. He never lets anything happen that we're not going to be able to handle, not going to be able to get through, and obviously with his help. But that has to do with being primed. You have to be ready for that, mentally, spiritually, and physically, and even emotionally. You have to be ready for anything that happens. Now, you're not always going to expect some crazy things to happen, whether that be somebody passing away or some random tragic event that you just don't account for. You can't always be ready, but you have to do your best. And the best way to do that is staying connected to God. The other thing was that it's his plan, and so therefore it's on his timeline. We can't change that at all. We can't make it go by any faster. We can't try to alter the plan in any way. He puts it on his timeline for a reason. And because of that, we just can't change it. And in that essence, it helps to not try and rush God because it's not going to happen. It just doesn't work that way. My next article talked about singing of his love and the fact that his love is greater than anything. He negates every sin with his grace and love, and it's through his crucifixion. Because God sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to live down on the earth, he humiliated himself to take the form of creation even though he was creator, which was a big deal in itself. But on top of that, he then died a horrible death, taking on all sins that every person, past, present, and future, would commit, which pretty big deal, and that's pretty loving. And it really showed me that all things that he allows us to go through are for a reason. Whether that be, for me, if I messed up on something, to use it later on in my ministry to help a young person that's struggling with the same things that I struggled with. Or maybe it's just because he needed us to learn that lesson. And that's really important because everything that happens is to further the kingdom of Christ. My next article talked about some reasons to lead and what it looks like leading in worship. And really the important part with worship is that you're not up there to just put on a show. You're not up there to just sound good. Of course, you want to sound good. You don't want the band to just not do well when you're up there, because then obviously the start of the service is not very good. But that's not the main goal. The main goal is for the band and the worship team to prepare people's hearts for what the pastor's about to bring, for what God's about to speak, and for what he's going to try to teach them in that moment. And the important part is you have to have the band in that position already. They already have to be connected. They have to be ready and have a spiritual awareness enough to where they can help bring those people closer to Christ and bring them to the foot of the cross so that they can really learn and take in what God is about to speak. The next article that I had talked about making mistakes. Now, everybody in here has made mistakes. It's kind of inevitable. We're human, and by human nature, we know how to do wrong before we do right. My youth pastor and mentor, Luke, he always tells us that he never had to teach his children to say no. They always knew how to say no. They always knew how to be bad and throw fits. But you do have to teach your children how to do the right thing. And this is important because even Christians, we aren't perfect. We still make mistakes. We still sin. It still happens. The important part, and the part that makes Christians different, or supposed to, is how we react to those mistakes and to those situations. And realistically, what's supposed to happen is you want to step back. You want to remove yourself from the situation and start evaluating yourself. Act in humility. And if you're in a position of leadership, maybe step down for a little bit, or maybe just step down completely. And sometimes that's really tough to do, and that's why I say you have to humble yourself in order to do this. Because if you don't, then one, it just looks like you don't care that you made a mistake. You look boastful, you look prideful, and that's not what you're supposed to do. That's not what God calls us to do. And through this, you never know. Maybe God, once you really search your heart and you determine why you're doing what you're doing, maybe he'll put you back in that position again. But maybe he doesn't. And if that's the case, then that's okay. That's how it is. It's all part of his plan, and his plan is for the greater good. And that's what's important. My last article talked about not throwing in the towel. And that's important because a lot of times being in ministry can be hard. There are times when you think that maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do. You may get in the middle, and somebody may be the pastor of a church, and they may be just going through a tough time where maybe there's not very many people that are accepting Christ. And so it makes you wonder, well, hey, is this really what I'm meant to do? It makes you question the calling that God's put in your life. And the important part is you can't question God's calling. If he has made it very evident that that's where you're supposed to be, then why question it? Why doubt it? Because it's God after all. His plan is the all-important plan. It's not going to change. And the important thing is that you have to follow in faith. Every step that he shows you, he may not show you the big picture. It may be just one small step at a time. You have to take a leap of faith that is the correct way to go, that you're truly following God in that direction. And if you don't know, then meditate on the Word, pray, talk to godly counsel, and really determine that is the route that God wants you to take. The next portion of ISM, we had to conduct a number of interviews with different people that are involved in our field of study. So for me, that involved me talking to worship pastors, women's pastors, youth pastors, even people that are outside of a church setting. And so it's been really cool, and I got to learn a lot through that. My first interview, as you saw, her name came up earlier, Carrie Bourne. She is the women's pastor at Genesis Metro Church, where I attend. And, sorry. Anyway, so she's the women's pastor at Genesis Metro Church, and she's a very important person in my life. She's been like a mother to me in many different situations, and so it's really cool. But what she taught me is, and what I really took out of our interview, was the qualities of a worship pastor. And the first part that she stated was that you have to have a connectedness to God, and you have to be spiritually grounded. That's obviously very important. You can't be on stage trying to lead people in worship if you yourself are not ready, if you yourself are not spiritually aware and connected to God. Because how are you going to lead somebody to God when you don't know him yourself? It would just be really hard to do that. The next part was you have to be a leader. Now, obviously, that kind of makes sense. Being a worship pastor, you would expect somebody to be a leader. But there's multiple different levels that you have to be a leader on. There's the physical level where you're leading the band. You have to let people know, hey, we're going to go through this set again. Hey, we're gonna kill here. We're not gonna go anymore. And so that's important. You have to be able to do that on the fly while you're performing. That's important. You have to learn to do that. But on a more important level, you have to be a spiritual leader. You have to, like I mentioned earlier, lead the people in the congregation to the foot of the cross. You have to prepare them, and you have to be spiritually aware enough to know whether or not this is where you die down. This is where you amp it up, where people are just really feeling it. You have to know where the Lord's moving in the music and in the set. The other idea was that you have to be able to handle adverse situations. At times there's going to be different situations that pop up, and you may not expect it to, but you have to be able to handle that on the fly, whether that means taking yourself out of the situation or just removing the situation completely and continuing to move forward. My next interview was with our associate pastor at Genesis Metro, and here I got to learn a little more about the hiring process, at least for Genesis Metro, as well as the daily ministry works, what that looks like for him specifically. As far as hiring goes, and from what I understand, this is how a lot of churches look at it, but specifically for Genesis Metro, they really want somebody that has a college degree. It doesn't necessarily have to be a seminary degree. The important part is they want to see that somebody has really stuck out school enough to work and earn the degree. And that's important because you don't want somebody that has dropped out of college or that just decided not to go because they just didn't feel like it. What does that mean for them getting hired at a church? Like, if they've just dropped out, how can you expect them to handle an adverse situation or a tough time in the church? Are they just going to quit, or are they going to keep going? And you don't know that. Having a college degree, while the degree may not necessarily be in ministry, it helps you to see that they will tough it out and they will keep going through those situations. Also, daily ministry. For Jeremy, daily ministry was very hands-on. He constantly is doing things throughout the church and has a schedule every week that he follows. There's one day, and I can't remember if he said it was Tuesday or Thursday, but he will go through the church and check utility things, lights, bathrooms, sinks, toilets, see if stuff needs to be fixed, see what's wrong, and he will determine whether or not he can fix it himself or if he needs to hire somebody. And that's something that I hadn't thought about. I'm not a very handy person when it comes to things like that, so I don't fix a lot. But it may be something that I need to learn if that's something that I'm going to have to deal with and handle myself as I get older and get into a church. My next interview was a very important one to me. It's with our executive pastor at Genesis Metro, Tim Boren. Yes, this is Carrie's husband. But it was really cool because he talked to me about calling, and this will also come up later in the presentation. But he really talked to me about what a calling looks like and for him what that means. And the important thing is that everyone is called to minister. By the Great Commission, everyone is called to go and make disciples throughout the world. Not everybody is called to go into full-time ministry. There's totally different ideas in that. You can be in your workplace, your business, the doctor's office, the school, and you can still tell people about Christ. But it's a whole different animal to be in the church daily and to be working like that. It's really important to determine whether or not full-time ministry is truly your calling, because if it's not and you just decide that you're going to go be a pastor, odds are you're going to burn out pretty quickly, because a lot of times pastors are overworked, they work really long hours, and it's not high pay. It's really not. You work a lot and you just don't see a lot of fruit as far as tangible payment coming out of it. The good thing is if you're doing things correctly and you're truly following God's plan, there will be fruit that is bared. There will be people accepting Christ, new people coming into the kingdom, which is the most important part. And that's what Tim told me. He said that you really have to make sure before you go into full-time ministry that it's truly where God wants you and truly in God's plan for you to be into full-time ministry. My next interview was with Tim Matthews, and he is our DFW, or more specifically Collin County area rep for FCA. And he's a really cool guy, and he just started this past year, I believe. But he talked to me about the fact that full-time ministry isn't necessarily in a church. He works for FCA, and what he discovered when he was younger as a teacher is that his mission field, he felt, were coaches and students. And through that, he eventually came to work for FCA, which allows him to do that, and he actually gets paid for that, which is really cool. But he talked to me about the fact that realistically, sometimes it takes a leap of faith to do something like that. For him, going from a teacher to working for FCA, he was going to take a pay cut. He didn't know what that would look like, and with his wife and kids, you don't know. Sometimes that just doesn't work out. You're not having enough to provide for your family, and I don't understand that yet, but that has to be stressful and a struggle in itself. And so for him to have to do that, he really did have to take a leap of faith and have to hold on to the fact that God was in control and to really trust him in that. And so that was really cool to see that. My next interview was possibly my favorite. Jordan Grizzard. He is one of the worship pastors at Prestonwood Church, and he was a really cool guy, very personable, and really emphasized what ministry looks like, even when you don't know somebody. And for him, what he talked to me about is different opportunities that you have within the church and then outside of the church. Within the church, you always have to recognize the fact that others are greater than yourself, especially if you're a pastor or whatever. Others' needs come before yours. If somebody needs help with something, even if you're in the middle of something or you're wanting to go to lunch, you know what? Sometimes you got to sacrifice. Sometimes you've got to be with that person. You've got to counsel them. You've got to help them with whatever it is. And sometimes that's tough. Sometimes you don't really want to. But that's how it is. And he taught me that giving yourself to the cause of Christ sometimes means giving everything you have. All that you are, maybe everything you possess. Sometimes God calls us to that. And that can be tough. But at the same time, if that's his plan, then it's for good and he will provide. He also, like I said, talked to me about opportunities that are outside the church. He had a crazy awesome opportunity where he was actually on the show American Idol and made it through to Hollywood Week. Now, he didn't make it past Hollywood Week, but I talked to him about it for a little while. And the interesting thing is he really wasn't he wasn't interested in doing that. The only reason he did it was because his wife made him. And when he did, he tried out and made it, but he really wasn't like wanting to do it for himself. It wasn't something where he was wanting people to learn who he was. He didn't really care about that. The biggest thing that he told me is that he really just wanted people to learn the name of Christ through that. If he made it all the way to the final, all he wanted people to know was that he was a Christ follower. He wanted people to learn about Christ through his actions and through his vocals as well. And so that was really cool because I hadn't really thought about that. All right, the next part is we had to get a mentor for our field of study. And obviously, as I've said a couple times, Luke, he's my mentor as well as my youth pastor. Just a little bit about Luke. Well, he's been a pastor since '06. He started out at Irving Bible Church and then moved to Odessa, and then now is at Genesis Metro Church currently and is the youth pastor there. He has 2 awesome kids and a wonderful wife that I consider all of them family. I'm very close with them, and they've helped me through a lot, and like I said, I'm just very close with them. But it's been really cool to have someone who's been such a good counselor and mentor to me outside of school to become my mentor as well in school. So the importance is that obviously I have a strong relationship with Luke. Before I even interviewed for ISM, I had an idea that I would do this, try to take this class, and I knew that if I got in, Luke was going to be my mentor. And I talked to him about it. He was like, "Yeah, like let's do it." And this is before even interviews started, so that was really cool. But like I said, he's my youth pastor. He's been a counselor to me through many different situations, as well as just being a mentor for me, and that's been really important. He's been a very godly example for me of how to be a husband, a father, and even just a leader in general when it comes to ministry. Also, he's been a huge inspiration for me because he's one of the people that has helped me recognize that ministry truly is my calling. He's put me into many adverse situations that maybe I wasn't completely comfortable with, but he's shown me that sometimes you have to get uncomfortable to further the ministry, further the kingdom, and further your ministry, which is really important. Now, as I said earlier, calling would come up, and I've mentioned it multiple times, but a lot of people may not really know what calling is. Calling, it's really the purpose for your life. What are you supposed to do? What is the job you're supposed to have? What are you supposed to do? What impact are you supposed to leave? And what legacy will you have? And so that's really what your calling is. How you find it, that kind of differs from person to person. It's really kind of odd because I asked everybody that I interviewed how they found their calling. What was it that really showed you that this is what you're supposed to do? And for each person it was different. Some people maybe heard an audible answer, an audible confirmation. Some people may have saw some sort of sign. And so it really depends on who you are. Some people go through situations, through tragedies and whatnot, and that's what helps them learn their calling. And so it was really interesting to see that because I was kind of hoping that for myself specifically that it would just be one set way, like, you know what, if this happens, you're going to full-time ministry. But sadly, that's not quite how it works. So for my calling, I've discovered that my calling is ministry, to go into ministry. Right now I say it's worship ministry, but I'm not completely sure about that. So I'm just going to say ministry in general because who knows, I may end up being a pastor of a church. How I found mine? Well, honestly, there was tragedy, inspiration, and prayer. And part of that sounds bad, part of that sounds good. And realistically, just the short version, at the beginning of 2015, the first few months of that, I had about 10 to 12 people that I had some sort of relationship or some sort of acquaintance with that passed away. A lot of them very tragically. A couple of them family, a couple friends, and like I said, a couple acquaintances. And through that, it hurt, honestly. It wasn't fun. Before then, I hadn't had anybody pass away that I was close to in any way, that I had any sort of relationship with, honestly. And going through that, it was something new for me. And it was one of those things that I really had to lean on God for because I didn't understand why. I didn't know why my great aunt had to pass away in a car accident. I didn't know why Mr. Dungan, our parking lot attendant, had to just be driving his motorcycle that day. I didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me. But what I recognized that these people all left legacies behind. My cousin, I think there were approximately 10,000 people that saw her funeral because of the impact that she had left. She had been such a kind person. She had such a heart for ministry and such a heart for people that her death affected so many. And it left a legacy, and it made an impact on those people. Mr. Dungan, we had a balloon releasing at our school, and we had approximately 200 to 300 students come out for that. And I got to speak in front of all those students and really talk to them about what God looked like in Mr. Dungan's legacy, the fact that his heart was so on fire for God, but at the same time so on fire for this school, that he wanted to spread God's love to every student and every teacher in this building. And that was the type of legacy that I wanted to leave. And yes, you can do that outside of ministry, but what really separated for me full-time ministry not was the fact that all I wanted to do through these situations was I wanted to be with these families. I wanted to help them. I wanted to help comfort them. I wanted to do anything that I could for these people and to continue to further the legacy of those that left theirs behind. And for me, that was really key in deciding that, you know what, this is where I'm supposed to go. Now, purpose, I mentioned purpose. Calling has to do with your purpose, and purpose, really, everyone has a purpose. Everyone's placed here to do something. Everyone's placed here to leave a legacy. What your purpose is, that's what you have to decide. Now, moving on a little bit. In ISM, we also had to create a devotional. We had to create a product. Mine ended up being a devotional. Now, we had some issues, obviously, with devotional, because those of you that know, it was originally starting out as a 30-day devotional. We have now had to cut it back to a 21-day, and I'll explain a little bit in just a few minutes. But we're going to do a 21-day devotional, and it's going to have multiple different contributors, people that are worship pastors, youth pastors, executive pastors, women's pastors, people that are in the business world, many different perspectives, which will be really cool. And the interesting thing is it will be all about calling. And the title of it is actually just going to be Called. And that's it. Very short and simple, but very impactful at the same time. And the reason we chose this is because a lot of people around my age, and even adults and younger students, they don't know what their calling is. They don't know what their purpose is in life. And so our hope through this was that people could use this devotional to truly discover what calling is and to truly discover what their calling is, and that's really important. Another reason we decided to do calling is that's been my biggest question this year. I've been trying to determine whether or not ministry is my calling, and through this I've been able to discover that it is, and that's the cool part. So also with the contributors, there's going to be a lot of different aspects that go into it. There's going to be a song that goes with each day that relates that each song will have to do with calling or purpose. Whether it be a Christian song or a secular song, that doesn't matter. All the songs are just going to have to do with purpose or calling. Also, with each day, there's going to be response questions where you can answer the questions about the devotional that are asking you about your personal life and whatnot. The good thing is it's going to be an interactive devotional in the fact that it does have questions, and you can use it in a small group. You can even use it in a larger group if you wanted to. And so I'm super excited to see the final product of it, and everything's going right now, and we're putting it all together, but I'm excited to see the finished product of it. So, Called. As I said, that is the title of the devotional that we have created, and I'm really excited about it. Like I said, we had a little bit of some issues with it. There were some struggles. And the main one being was just getting the sheer amount of devotionals in that we were asking for. Luke and I, we both expected to do 3 to 4 ourselves, which is 8. But we asked a number of contributors to contribute 1, 2, maybe 3, depending on who it was. And we just didn't end up getting in as many as we thought we would. Some people just couldn't, and that's understandable. People have lives, and people have schedules. They have things that they have to get done. So it happens, but we just had to kind of roll with the flow. Anyway, we just had to go with it. And for that aspect, we ended up cutting it down from 30 days to 21 days, which realistically, that's still really good. That's a 3-week devotional. Or if you wanted to split it out in 5 days, I mean, you could do 4 weeks and not do it on the weekends and have 1 day left over, which is cool. But also, it's kind of tough because a lot of our contributors, and even myself and Luke, we tend to procrastinate a little bit. And so coming up to the deadlines that we had set, we didn't even have I think we had, on the day that we asked them to turn them in, I believe we had 3 or 4 devotionals turned in. 3 or 4 out of 30. That's not a lot, and it was a little stressful getting that. But at the same time, that's also partially our fault if we didn't follow up enough and remind them enough. But it happens, and so we just kind of had to roll with that and really just decide where we would go from there. Now, the devotional itself, obviously I already told you, it's about God's calling that He's placed on our lives and our purpose that He has for us. And it's really important. And like I said, the reason that we did it like this is because we want to help people discover their calling. It's targeted to more of a high school to middle school age student, but it can really be used for anybody. It can be used for adults. It can be used for young kids, although they may not understand it as much. But it can be really used for all age groups. And like I said, with calling and my calling being my biggest question this year, it was really important for me to do something in this manner. So the way God has worked in this, and it's been really cool, is that as far as contributors, there's been a number of people that I don't even know personally. A lot of them are contacts that Luke has, whether it be his brother, some friends that he has at other churches. They have all been willing to contribute to this, which has been really cool. The fact that they were willing to help us with this and to make a difference in the aspect of creating this devotional. Within the last week to 2 weeks, we have had a number of devotionals turn in, and that has been awesome because it's been quite a stress reliever. Luke and I thought we were actually going to have to cut it down to 14 days from 30, but ended up being we only had to cut it down to 21, which is still really good, and we're very pleased with that. Also, it's just been inspiring just to see how God has worked through this, just to read some of the devotionals that have come in and to see how people are reacting to it, and it's been really cool to see that. So before I close, I'm actually going to read you one of the devotionals that I wrote, just to give you a little taste of what that looks like. So this one is titled God's Purpose, Our Calling, and the key verse is centered around Jeremiah 29:11. Purpose, what is it? Calling, what is it? Well, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, purpose is the reason why something is done or used. So in our case as Christians, it would be the reason we are created. Also, according to Merriam-Webster, calling is a work that a person does or should be doing. For Christians, this translates into how we fulfill the purpose God has for our lives daily. According to the Great Commission, we are all called to make disciples and followers of Christ. We are all called to spread the Word of God, but how each person does that is different. Some people are called to be in full-time ministry, such as pastors. Others are called to minister to youth and children, like teachers. Either way, we are called to minister to others, and it is all a part of God's plan. In this plan, the Lord tells us in Jeremiah 29 that His plans for us are for good and not for disaster, to give us a hope and a future. Meaning that in everything we do, God has a plan, and it includes us. He never wants us to fall into destruction, but instead gives us hope and salvation through His Son, Jesus. A lot of times, the hardest part is discovering what God's calling for your life is. I went back and forth for multiple years about what I wanted to do, as any child might. I wanted to join the Air Force, and then thought I would become a lawyer, and then finally settled on the fact that I want music to be my career. It just turned out that by me wanting to go into music, and through being involved in my church youth band, I've discovered that the calling God has placed in my life. I now know that God has called me into full-time ministry, and presently I believe that this will be in worship ministry. This last year has been very key in me discovering the calling God has placed in my life. I have made mistakes, had experiences, and been humbled on many occasions. And each of these have been contributing factors that have helped me to discover this calling, because these events or experiences all had a purpose. It is interesting the way that God works because He reveals things to us that we never would have seen. And He does so in the most creative ways. It may be through loss, or it may be through mistakes, or even through an impactful experience such as a church camp. Whatever way He reveals it, He gives each and every one of us a calling, a plan full of hope for our future. So, like I said, that is just one of the devotionals that will be in the book, and that one is specifically written by myself. But I'm very excited to see how it turns out in the end. It's going to be really cool to really hold the book in my hands and to be able to flip through it and to use it to help minister to others. And so, like I said, I'm very excited about it, and I know Luke is as well. So in conclusion, I just want to say thank you for everyone that has been here, everyone that has come. I want to say thank you to all the contributors that we have had here or not here right now. Specifically, I want to say thank you to Luke. Everything that he's done, the inspiration that he's given me, and the way that he has helped me in many ways. If there are any questions, I will now take them.